We open in prayer. Thank you, Father, for bringing us here to learn from your word. Help us to trust you and that you might guide us. I pray that you will work through me to speak what you would have. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, we've been going through Genesis, and we're in chapter 41, and we'll be taking off at verse 37. And for those who have been here, usually we do a quick review. So tell me what's been going on up to this point. Anyone? Lemuel. That hand went up fast. Got out of prison. He was a bad guy. No? Okay. Okay, good. He said that Joseph, Pharaoh had a dream. He was upset that nobody could tell the answer to it. He had all these wise men, and Joseph is brought forward because Joseph has told dreams in the past, and now he has a concise answer to what it is, and actually a answer to what they should do about it too, which is a step further on than what just Pharaoh was asking. What kind of man is Joseph? Anyone? We'll let somebody else have a chance, son. Yes? Bold? Yes?
I don't think he gets discouraged. He doesn't let the circumstances control him.
At least what we see.
Right.
Yeah. There might be a possible, maybe tweak in this account that shows a little bit of his emotions as we go through it.
But he does well.
Yeah.
They think highly of him.
Yes, they don't see the outward, the inward of what's going on. It's not obvious. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, to me, it's an amazing account because here's this slave and prisoner who's brought forward. I mean, even the amazing part that he has to get cleaned up, shaved, which means he's probably possible. I doubt if he had his beard all neatly trimmed. You know, he's probably a little bit ragged. He doesn't have a lot of the comforts and conveniences that we have. He's cleaned up. He's given different clothes to come. You don't come to the king smelling bad. You don't have the king looking bad. So they cleaned him up and gave him an opportunity to be clean. So things are starting to change for Joseph. It's not your normal thing. Now, as he comes, I know it doesn't say this, but what do you think he's thinking about? I don't think he's right beside the palace. I think he had a little time, maybe at least cleaning up as well as transferring over. What do you think's running through this guy's mind? I know this is adding to the scriptures, but there's probably something. I mean, what do you think? Yes, Lemuel? Yeah, it could go bad, possibly. Yes, Dave? Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, it's been 2 years since he's talked to the wine taster and the cook slash bread maker. It's been a while. It's been 2 years. So it's not been on the top of his mind. It could be multiple things could happen. But it's possible that he knew that there was a dream issue going on here. for me, if I had told the answer to the dream and it actually came through to two other guys, and I knew that God gave me a dream, and everybody in my family knew what that dream meant, and that's part of the problem I was in, I'd wonder, I wonder what's going on here. I wonder where God's working. Because in everything in this man's life, it was always about God. Everything permeated about God, and people see what God means to you when you go places. They know what you're about. And oftentimes, they don't even have to ask the question. For instance, if you use bad words, does that tell people that you're a believer in Jesus Christ? Not really. Not really. And if you go carousing at night with all your friends, does that tell them that you're a believer in Jesus Christ? No. And if your kids are wild and hellions, does that tell them that what you are teaching permeates your family? But everything about Joseph told them that he was a believer. And have people come up to you and told you, I know that you're a believer. He said, why do you know that? I see it in your life. I see it in things. And not only that, but they introduce you to opportunities because you're a believer. Has that happened to you? Now, I don't pick on you, Tony. You're talking to guys all the time with a microphone. And do you cuss at those guys when they're down on the ground? You see them like little ants around you, and you'd like to drop something down on, I don't know.
I won't let them cuss on my radio, and when they do, they apologize or
Yeah.
do better next time. I get a couple of them, turns out pretty good.
And these are rough guys. Oftentimes good hearts, but rough exteriors. I've worked in those fields before, and we don't have to be like them. I knew of a guy that claimed to be a Christian. I worked with him for a number of years, and I said, why in the world do you cuss? He says, well, I went through the service, and you can't go through the service without having that. It's like, don't think so. My father was a Marine in World War II. Pretty tough situation. He went through boot camp, he went through all of that. He never got a tattoo, and he never learned to cuss. He was a born-again believer long before he ever came there. He had his education, and then he was in the service during that time. And he didn't pick that up. And there's assumptions that people have, there's justifications for what they do. Joseph didn't justify. He was always on tune with God. So this slave prisoner was brought forward, and I think he's kind of wondering, what's going to happen with my dream? You know, that's got to be in the back of his mind, kind of tumbling around every once in a while. God, is this real? Is this going to happen? Did I just imagine it? You know, something along that line. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, and it's very possible. But notice when he did interpret, and it's last week's lesson, he never used the word I, ever. He said, you need to find somebody. And you kind of wonder, it's not like, here I am. It wasn't that at all. He wasn't about exclaiming himself, but he was exclaiming the need. He was exclaiming what should happen. And as good leaders, they received that good counsel. And that's where we take off today. Joseph's plan. Well, let's read some of this. Why don't we read through 39? It's a long ways. Melody, you're an excellent reader. Why don't you read those two verses? 37 through 39, actually.
Now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants,
in this, he had produced a plan. The plan was, first of all, he introduced God to the people. And then he introduced that they needed to have an overseer. He introduced that they had to collect food. And by the way, part of that collection of food, it says grain, but in the translation, it actually means food. So they're collecting all kinds of food. Everything that can be preserved, it appears. It's not just grain. Everything that can be saved over a 7-year period of time. And I don't know exactly what that is, but it's a lot of stuff. And then his plan was to guard it. And his plan also was to increase taxes. Now that wasn't a big deal when you're having incredible abundance. What's the tax rate that we pay, by the way? Anybody have an idea? What percentage do we pay in taxes here in the state? Okay. 10% sales tax, yes?
Then you got property tax.
Right, is percentage of our income is, yeah, it depends on your pay.
Then you have business and occupation tax that gets passed on to consumers when they purchase stuff.
Mm-hmm. Gas tax. Self-employment. If you're employed, you have to pay double tax because you're paying your Social Security and you're paying all that stuff out that you don't even realize that your business, place of business, actually that's tax you're paying because that's part of what they figure when they have to hire somebody. They have to pay the Social Security, you pay half, they pay half. It's a pretty heavy, and there's a lot of other things that are little taxes that go in that keep on getting raised. In our new management, it appears like taxes will go up. They were talking about $4,000 more per family or unit per person that they're introducing, and that'd be interesting, don't you think? You like that? Get to pay $4,000 more than what you're already paying? Well, great. Anyway, that's what I think whenever I taxes, and most of the time for me, when I see an agenda of taxes, I'm going to vote no. Almost across the board. I'm going to vote no, no more taxes. Here, there wasn't a choice. They doubled the amount of taxes. In good times, that's okay, I guess. But these people are paying more taxes too. And he has a plan. But guarding it, that's an interesting statement, don't you think? You know, you're going to guard this food. At first, it probably wouldn't be a big deal, but as time goes on, you're going to need those guards. That becomes a lot of wealth. That becomes the Pharaoh's wealth. And later on, as we study the plan as it unravels, the wealth becomes power to Pharaoh because everybody becomes his slaves, and the land is owned 100% by the Pharaoh because of Joseph's and God's plan. Now, I will put this out there right off the get-go. God is building a nation that is powerful. Why? Why? Yes, Eric?
To glorify himself.
Yes, and how is that done? And who's going to come with Joseph? Moses and the whole nation. It's going to be God's people that he's building a nation. Right now, there's going to be 70 people come in. 70 people, and it's an interesting thing, and they're being drawn out of a very unrighteous place to go to a place that is not very righteous to begin with. It's got a lot of gods everywhere, but the really redeeming thing there was they couldn't marry because those people didn't want anything to do with them. They hated slaves. They hated shepherders. And they were given their own land, kind of the corner of Israel, and they didn't want anything to do with them. So up till this time, there's a little bit of a problem of intermarriage with the Canaanites. And later on, we're going to find out that God doesn't want that. It becomes a law that you're not supposed to do that. And he's protecting the nation, and he's making a strong nation around them to protect them. Nobody's going to touch them. This becomes a world power. And this whole famine becomes a world power to Egypt. When you notice all the rest of the lands are starving, Egypt's content. And that is drawing the people of Israel, who, by the way, weren't very righteous at this time. And in a way, when they get droughts, that's a judgment. Later on we learn that's a judgment of God, that you drought because you weren't unrighteous to God. They suffered that. And God's blessing was on Egypt, not Israel. You see, through his man, Joseph. And then it puts an umbrella over the nation of Israel. Yes?
But I also see Israel, Egypt trusting in God.
Yeah.
By saving that food up. I mean, it's not a normal thing to do, to increase your taxes when things are good.
Yeah.
That was a national trust in our God. Not their God, but their God.
Yeah. It's a trust in the God, but it's a little bit like the disciples later on. They believed, but did they fully believe? They were starting to get that. Because of God's man, they were learning the witness of God. And God becomes a common word. Now, I want to introduce Eric. Eric is a friend of mine from the east, and way east. And he and I were roommates at Moody, so we had lots of theological discussions. We've had lots of theological discussions. He came on my birthday, by the way. I just got a year older. Thank you very much. Okay, so I don't feel a whole lot different. But Eric came and showed up in the meal while we were having the celebration, which was kind of cool. Anyway, we spent some time and talking together, but that's Eric Anderson. So thank you for coming, Eric. Anyway, we were hiking, and we went out and did a lot of things yesterday. And we went to the little town of Franklin. Franklin's got a lot of history. It's a kind of a ghost town, you could say now. And it's got a mine shaft that goes 1,300 feet down into the ground. 14 by 12 mine shaft, way down. 500 feet is below sea level. Anyway, as we were walking, I told some other people some of the history of Franklin and some of the history of the Green River Killer. And then as we were kind of leaving them for the first time, the lady says, "God bless." Eric thought that was just a common statement. Is it a common statement here? Eric, hear that? He says, "Well, it's common where I'm from." He says, "That doesn't necessarily mean they're Christians." I said, "I think so." You just don't hear that. And then later on, we met at the shaft, and we were talking some more, and it's pretty obvious they're homeschoolers, they go to church, the church is open, they believe in Jesus, and it was really cool. And but a Christian will have things of God on their tongue regularly. I hope you do. It's a great way to witness. It brings the subject around to God right now. And Joseph did that all the time. And the people learned it, and God exalted him. Now, one of the things we have to learn from this lesson is, if you do everything right, are you going to be exalted? No. So don't take this story, this account, and say, well, this is going to be me someday. I'm going to get all these riches, and I'm going to be the second in command under Biden? Well, anyway. Anyway. Or whomever's going to be leader. No, but you will be a witness for Christ. That's the point. God will use you where you're at. And as you do that, he will use you in more ways. It may not be what you think. Because all of us have different gifts in all of different places and all of different purpose. But the main purpose is we're here to glorify Christ and his Father. That's what we're about. And sometimes it might mean not good times, but in Hebrews 11, it could mean a saw, and it could be a flame, and it could be something else that's not very pleasant as you go to the Father. But the main thing is you will be a witness. And to your society. And that's what we're called to be, and that's walking by faith. So let's talk about Joseph. We're not getting very far here. Then Joseph said to his servants, like Melody said, can we find a man like this who is a divine spirit? They had at least a concept there of what a divine spirit was. They responded better to him than his own family did. I thought that was cool. And they, in fact, saw in him that he had the Spirit of God in him. Who else can we find that has the Spirit of God in him? And they saw something that the world saw something in him that people who should have known God weren't seeing. Now, I find that interesting. Is that true about Christ? He came into his own, and his own did not receive him? They should have known. Sometimes the world sees things more clear than even those who are supposed to know God. That is almost a judgment against Christians, isn't it? Sometimes Christians do that. Are we really in the will of God? Anyway, I'm getting too convicting. Let's move on. He's God's Spirit. The Egyptians saw the supernatural and they realized they had a need. That's amazing. And they knew they had a need for the future. And not just Pharaoh. Everybody there. It was 100%. That is God preparing the way ahead of this man. This is a huge flip of Joseph's whole life. His whole life up to this point has been, you could say, a downward spiral. And every time he was found faithful. Amazingly, it's just all of a sudden everything changes. Everything changes for this man. And they saw the need of God's help through God's man. And I've seen that happen at times in my life. It may not be as dramatic as this one, but I've seen it over and over again. Be faithful to his calling and to his witness. Well, let's read on, verse 40 through 44. I'm just going to pick on people today instead of going around. Dave, could you read, I know you're a good reader, 40 through 44? Amazing. This slave prisoner gets this kind of power. Well, let's look at this for a minute. What does it mean over Pharaoh's house? What do you think that means?
All the business aspects of it.
Okay. But his house, what does that mean? Okay. Do you see a parallel? Does he have experience in this kind of thing? Anyone? Potiphar. He did that. Now, wait a sec. Does Pharaoh know what's going on? This guy blew it in Potiphar's house. He puts him over his own house. Does it seem ironic to you? Thank you. I think Pharaoh knew there's a little something rotten here, and it's not Joseph. There's an underlying thing going on here that he put him because he trusted him and knew something. I think, and I'm surprising you a little bit, but to put him in that position, has to say, well, you've had a problem in this in the past, so we're not going to put you there. You have everything else under control, but I'm going to take care of my own house. Thank you. You blew it there. No. You did the right thing at the right time. You were mistreated, and I trust you, even with my own house. And you know what? Potiphar was very close to the king. It is possible that God worked through that, and Potiphar talked to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh knew there was something not right. Yes? Yeah, he does. God works wonders, and I think that's true here through this. But when we went through the whole account with Potiphar's wife, there seems to be some inkling that this may not have been the first time that this ever happened. And that Potiphar's a great man, but watch out for the wife. And I think that stuff gets around. The stories go. Yes? Right.
But he just moved him over. Okay, well, I mean, in essence, okay, well, it didn't work out at home because of my wife, so I'll bring you to work. He didn't put him in charge of the execution jail.
Which is his area. Right, it's his area.
Okay, well then, I'll use you at work.
I still trust you, but I'm getting you away from the problem. It is not a very nice place. I mean, he had to get cleaned up, shaved, new clothes, that kind of thing. But yes, I think Pharaoh may have known a bit about that. We're going to see, at least from my way of thinking, trust in this man. And that's what we're looking at, is this man is trusted hugely to have everything over your whole household. Everything, including food. I mean, he's in fact being exalted over the wine taster. The wine taster that is majorly trusted, Joseph would be trusted to protect Pharaoh and his family. Now, let me ask you this. Who would you trust over your family? 100%. Who would you trust? That is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it?
Well, I was going to say, in Egypt, Pharaoh was God.
Yeah.
This guy's trusting in Joseph's God over the God of Egypt.
Yeah. It seems like there's inklings there. Now, I don't think they were ready to give up all their gods, but he saw that he's at least a God-ish man, and he wants to put him in that place. Now, I would say in our world, there's not a lot of people I would trust to take care of my family if I had to go on a long trip, or in fact, if I knew I was going to die, who am I going to put in place to take care of all the things in my family? Who would I do? Who would I trust? Yes, that's true. You people would be my first choices. Brothers and sisters of Christ. People who have the Spirit of Christ in them. Right? That's where we would first go, the family of God. Well, he goes to a man of God to trust this. Well, he's over his house. And then he says, these are all changes that happen to Joseph. He's over a man's house again. But also there's homage. And this homage actually means hang on his words or hang on his mouth. Listen to what he has to say. How many of you, there was a commercial when E.T. Hutton or something like that speaks, everybody listens. Do you remember that commercial? I'm not saying his name right, I don't think, but E.F. Hutton? Everybody speaks. Why? Because he knows finances, and your finances are going to go up because you listen to the stock market. Who is it that you listen to for all the important business things? And that's what Pharaoh is doing, is when Joseph speaks, you all tune your ears to him. That's a different type of homage than what happens later on here. It's a different type. He has the wise words. So then he's called the Secretary of the State, and everything he does is under his control except the ultimate death penalty, is basically what he's saying. The throne has that, but you have everything else. Everything is under your control. Talk about a man that somebody wants to hear from. This is the man, a man of God. And he's given a ring. So all the papers, all the documents, he's given the king's signet ring. The signet ring, the concept that you would take wax and you'd seal it so everything you said came directly from you and nothing could be voided from what your word is. So not only your verbal voice, but your written voice will be heard, which is important because not everybody's going to hear his voice. But you've got a whole kingdom, and he's going to send out letters to the whole kingdom of what his charges are, and everybody better listen to what he has to say. So he's given the ring. He's given the robes. Now, he can't wear his normal clothes. He's got to look like his position. So everybody realizes, and so the royal robes are given to him. He's given a necklace, and I think, necklace is kind of weird, but I don't like necklaces, generally speaking. It kind of slows me down. But when you're cutting something on the saw, Benjamin, when you're cutting something on the saw, do you like something dangling down in front of the saw? I don't either. But he's not running saws. He's telling people his voice and his written word are everything about this man. And when I was privileged to go to Europe, they have a couple things that are real important. They have a sword that's all jewel encrusted. They usually have a crown, and they usually have a necklace. And the necklace, it isn't really a necklace. It's a chain with the state emblems on it that show your authority. I think that's what this is about. And it's usually pretty ornate, and it has the crest of different important families or things like that on it. And that seems to be what this was about, is the authority of the whole nation over him over them. Golden chain, symbol of authority. And then this chariot. Now he's going out to the people. He's all prepared, and he's got the chariot, and he goes out to people. What does a chariot signify to you? Yes, Lemuel. Power. What type of power? Anybody? Military power. I mean, World War II. If you could fly in an airplane, but nobody sees you, right? If you wanted military power, you would get on a tank. If anybody went against you, it's like, the guns go in front of you. It's like, I don't want to say anything to this guy. He's got power behind him. And in Egypt, their tanks, their ultimate power was their chariots. They were fast, and it was hard to shoot somebody out of a chariot because it was their ultimate weapon. And it was a position of authority. Now, when Christ first came to Israel, and he introduced himself what did he ride on? A donkey. Now, I don't think of his donkey as a position of power. It's a position of entering king of peace. That's what that donkey signified, if you didn't know that. It's a kingly thing, but it's a king of peace. Now, he will enter another time in his second coming, in his second advent. What does he ride then? A white horse. The white possibly signifying purity, and the horse is power. He's going there, kick butt, take names. He's already got the names. And he doesn't really have to kick butt. He just speaks. Joseph's just speaking. And everybody is following his speaking. It's amazing. But he has The whole thing, the whole garb. The Pharaoh is giving him everything. And then the people are supposed to bow the knee. Well, that's different than what happened before. There was the homage is a bowing, but it's listening to his words. Now, the people are to be bowing as he comes out. They are to fall before him in homage to him. It's an authority thing. It is nobody stands in front of this man. And lastly, no one moves. They don't move their hands. They don't do anything without Joseph telling them, yay or nay. Can you imagine that kind of power? Don't raise your hands. Raise your hands. It's like, what's that game we used to play? Do you remember? Thank you. This is Joseph Says. Okay, you're out. Eric, you're out. You didn't obey. You're out of the game. That's ultimate power. And Joseph was given that. You know? Wow. That's amazing. I don't know anybody was given that power. Now, we do know that Daniel was third in the kingdom. And he was given an incredible power in a very powerful nation. God puts his man there. But this was even more than anybody, even than peers like Daniel had. Although when Nebuchadnezzar was gone for 7 seasons, 7 years possibly, probably Daniel ran the kingdom during that time. So in a way, he was king for that moment. And he brought righteous rule. Well, here's Joseph again, bringing righteous rule, and the word of God is on his tongue. They have to listen to his words. And he's talking about God. Amazing, isn't it? So, let's see. We're going to now read verse 45. Let's see here. Stuart, could you read verse 45?
Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt.
Okay, there's a lot here in this one verse. So he's given a new name, which is pretty typical. A lot of people aren't real sure what this means, but there's a suggestion, means possibly abundance of life, or God speaks and lives. So his whole being, when people said, God speaks and lives, every time they say his name, that's pretty amazing. He's given a wife from a priestly family. Doesn't mean that she was a worshiper of that God. She may or may not have been, but she was definitely a Egyptian, and she. Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Anyone? Surmise. Yes. Thank you. That's what I would say. And it also makes an alliance between Joseph and Egypt. Usually a marriage makes an alliance. Okay? But yes, that protects his family life. Now, we saw that Pharaoh was interested in protecting his family, and so he also protects Joseph's family. And he also does one other thing. He gives potential a future. And we'll see that because they have children. He gives him that. And every man, most men need a godly wife. There are some that have the gift of singleness. I understand that. But most men need that. And the wife stands behind him and protects him. Protects him from what? A lot. Evil women, yes, thank you. And society, because there's this stuff that goes along behind you, and women have really good sensors for that kind of stuff. And they protect your back. That's what she was about. And I think There was a lot of wisdom in this Pharaoh and the choices he's making to establish this man so he would not have another Potiphar situation to protect behind him. And I think that this wife also may have known something about what happened as well and puts a big barrier in front of it to protect this man. And I'll tell you what, guys, if you think you're an island to yourself, you're not. You need that protection that a woman can give you. And women, I know in our society that women at least sometimes feel like that they are not honored. Well, there's a lot that can happen here toward their strength in protecting the man that God has given them. It is huge. You remember the saying that says, behind every good man is a great woman. Look at the major men in history and look at the wives that may not necessarily got the acclaim, but I think in heaven, God knows everything. God knows everything. And sometimes the things us men accomplish is directly because they had a godly wife behind them. And God sees all that and will reward faithful service. And it's not about here and now, it's about the eternal. So know that. And just because you don't get the acclaim doesn't mean God doesn't know. And so he gets a wife. He marries a union between Israel and Egypt. And God is preparing this. Verse 46. Somebody like to read? David. 46.
Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt.
Okay. He's a young guy, moderately. I mean, I'm just turned 64. That looks kind of young. I mean, I'm more than double his age. Is this age an important age? Anyone? Okay. Did you know that you could not be a Pharisee or considered an elder until you were 30? Do you know that Christ started his ministry at 30? 30, there's different ages that the Bible kind of produces. It's not a list of like we would like it to be, but there's something to this 30 years old. And we even kind of put things behind it. The guys' brains aren't totally together until certain ages. But 30 years old, guys are thinking pretty straight. Yes? God has what? Yes, he uses 3. That's true. When it's real important. Yep. 30 years old is important. This man has been how many years in a mess-up situation? 13 years. So we also know that 13 years have transpired when we hear of this 30, but I don't think that's why it gave us this 30. I think it gave us this 30 to know the age that this man was when he started doing this. And yet he was young in a lot of perspectives. And that didn't seem to matter because he was a man with God was leading. So he was a wise man when he stood before Pharaoh, and he went out and he looked at the nation. When a person takes authority, oftentimes that's what the first thing he does is let's go out and look at what kind of things we need to deal with. Well, so let's read on, and I'll read. Then Joseph, let's see, and during the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundance. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food that was its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up the grain in great abundance, like the sands of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. I don't know what that exactly means beyond measure. It's a lot, is the point. And he stored it up wisely. Here's some of the details of how he did it in the cities. So can you imagine the building project that he had to have enough room for all these supplies? It wasn't just like we surmise, it's just wheat. I don't think it was just wheat. I think it was multiple things. Yes? Lentils? Lentils? They had lots of things. Oh, you don't know. Okay, son, think about it and let me know when it comes to your mind. They stored up lots of stuff. And they stored it up in the cities. Why did they store it in the cities? Why didn't they just bring it to the central government? It'd be a lot easier to guard, don't you think? No? Right. That's part of his plan. That it's going to be redistributed back to the people. Now, what if we had Fort Knox that was in every city? So it could be redistributed. Wait a sec, they don't want to redistribute Fort Knox, do they? And we don't have Fort Knox, but that's a historic thing. Do you know that some United States bills were actually printed in the towns at one point? They gave them the ability to print. I have United States dollars that were printed in Newton, Iowa, and Davenport, and places like that. They weren't in a central place and then distributed out. They printed out their own money, I'm sure, under the offices, because they were used in that town and they were allowed to print in those towns. Same thing here, that this food was going to be redistributed back again. Yes, Lemuel? Dates? Yeah, they probably dried dates and dried a lot of fruits and vegetables and other things. It was a food thing that they were doing for the needs of the people when the bad times came. He knew it was coming and he was preparing for that eventuality. It wasn't just good times, it was also thinking of the hard times coming. Dave? Yeah. Thank you. That is a big difference, isn't it? Yes?
Well, and at some point, people must have, you don't know how it was communicated, but at some point, people must have realized, wait, they're increasing the taxes, wait, they're storing all the grain over there. Maybe I should store some of my own excess. Maybe we should eat a little less overusing. I know we have plenty now, but.
Yeah. It's possible that some people thought that, and yet we don't see very much of that, because by the time it's all said and done, Pharaoh owns everything. Everything. By the time 7 years goes by, a bad. Yes, sir?
Do you think it would have been probable that they would have told the people we're going to have 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine because God has told us so, just them being very religious society?
I actually think that it was told, and yet how much, even in America, we have been a land of plenty, and how much do we live from hand to mouth? One of the big things that I see a difference between studying about World War I and World War II and then today, people would store up lots of things for the hard times. How much is stored up in your house, by the way, for the hard times? Do you think we might have hard times? I think maybe. Now, we're not building a lesson on storing food here. That's not the purpose of this lesson. But I do think that we're so used to everything going well that we don't think about the future for it. What if the electricity was turned off? What if the stores didn't have food for a while? What if? Well, think about that. I don't want us to become... But is that not trusting God, or is that trusting God? Some thoughts. I'm not dictating. Let's just think about it. The Proverbs talks about storing up. Be like the ant who stores up for the winter. There could be a point where you're trusting your storage more than you're trusting God, though. That's the other side of it. And it's not just about the bank accounts either, because I'll tell you what, there's countries that have all of a sudden just absorbed everybody's bank accounts. All of a sudden it's gone. because it's their money. Yes?
Archaeologists are, of course, going through Egypt, still digging up stuff, and they're finding these underground storage areas, and they're attributing to Joseph.
That's cool. Yes?
I worked with Romanians for a while, and they didn't have any food, and they didn't store any food. And we said to them, you need to have a flashlight and 3 days worth of food just in case. And they said, oh no, if the power goes out, the government will come. So their faith was right there in that government. And
So,
it was American government, so
yeah, people don't think that way here, though, do they?
they do, they offer.
I'm being slightly sarcastic. Okay, moving on. So, where were we anyway? 30 years, gathering in cities, more than recorded. It's a lot of food. It's a lot of storage. God is greatly blessed. Now, verse 51 and 52, I'll read that also. And Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And he named his second Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Well, we learn these guys' names. Manasseh meaning forget the household that he came from. Well, he didn't forget his father, but he was forgetting his brother's bad deeds. And he starts during these 7 years of plenty, and actually starting into the bad years, he has children. The oldest they're going to be is 7 years old-ish. And he names the first one, God's given me forgetfulness. And you can see his emotions here, can't you? You actually finally see a bit of his feeling. You see that this really kind of bothered him, didn't it? It bothered him, and God has given him answers to it. And he will have further answers. You meant it for good, but God meant it. Or you meant it for bad and evil. God meant it for good. And here is the first of his, again, giving praise to God. And what are children? Children are a blessing. And these children are his blessing. And he's giving them names that are blessings, names. Not everybody does that. Sometimes the names are really like, why would you call your kid that? They're not giving him God glory for it. He gives God glory in the names. And the second one means double fruitfulness, by the way. It's amazing as they're just piling up so much that Joseph doesn't even know what to do with it all. And his son. And I think Joseph may have had the concept of piling up for Egypt, but God's plan was bigger than Egypt. God's plan was almost a worldwide catastrophic event. Now, I don't know if it's worldwide toward the world they knew or worldwide all the way across the whole world. I do not know. But the point of it is, he prepared something that was so large that the whole world would come to the knees of Egypt and make them a world power. He's producing a world power. God is a world power here. That Pharaoh has all control. So that when he takes the Israelite, the 70 people, and plants them into there, they're protected in an enveloped, protected environment. And that's what happened. But in his family, he's given blessing also. He doesn't just bless his work, he blesses his family through his wife. And it's amazing. When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all the lands. But in the land of Egypt there was bread. Now, I've suggested this before. God is blessing, as he's done over and over and over again, Joseph's work. And everybody involved with what Joseph's doing, because he's a man of God, is being blessed. So the whole nation is blessed through Joseph and ultimately through God as the mirror, the light, the reflection of God's man. And that's what we should do. To put actual truth to this thing, we should be God's reflection, and people are blessed because of us, just like Joseph. And but not true in the other lands that were not living righteously, including Israel, at that time called Canaan. And the people who were supposed to have been blessed weren't blessed because they weren't walking with God. Most of them. And they had to come to the blessed place. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he has, he will give you, he will do." So they started getting hungry. He didn't divvy this stuff out immediately. He waited till people had the need. God sometimes does that with us too, doesn't he? He doesn't give us right away. He waits for us to call out, ultimately, so we trust him. When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened the storehouse and said to the Egyptians, and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt, but they were protected. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe on the earth. And the world came to Egypt. It became a world power. And even Joseph's family, which was the completion, because the dream wasn't complete yet, was it, that Joseph had? Remember, the dream was his family would bow down to him, including his parents would bow down to him. That was the completion of the dream. So Joseph's dream had not yet come true. What do we learn about God? What do we learn about his man? What do we learn about uncertain times? What do we learn about people and his plan? Just because we're faithful doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. Not always. With Christ it wasn't, and he said, if you're a follower of me, don't expect people to applaud you for doing what's right, but that doesn't change. We should do what's right. We learn about God. God is true to his promises. And we need to be walking in faith and not listening to what the world ravages and rages around us. And I'll tell you what, there's plenty of the world's raging around us today. Do we trust God in the midst of it? And I'll tell you what, Egypt was not a great place to be, but God planted his man in that place. Are you looking for God's purpose and how God moves? Sometimes people say, there's no witnessing going on right now. We don't have opportunities to do that. I'll tell you, I see just the opposite. I see God working mightily. I see opportunities, but they're not what we normally have thought. For instance, the camps aren't open anymore. The places that we had known and done in the past, and many churches aren't open anymore. Are we finding ways that God is doing uniquely in this time? This is not unique. This Joseph thing coming out of prison is not unique, and God doesn't do the same thing every time, all the ways that we think it should be. We have done church in a certain way. We may be called to do it differently. How can we be faithful to God in this time? We are called to be faithful and glorify him. Joseph glorified him in everything that he did, in the bad situations, the good situations. Sometimes the good situations are harder than the bad. Joseph was faithful. Be faithful as you go out today and this week and this year. We might find some really unique times. Let's pray. Bless this time, Father. Bless your people and help us to walk your ways in Jesus' name. Amen.